Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 6 of Cultural Communication Confidence. And the focus for today's episode is, do I have to be an extrovert to be a confident presenter? The reason I'm talking about this topic today is that I often get this question from my clients. They see TED speakers or they see confident speakers in the organizations that they work in, and they look at them and they think, wow, this person really is so confident. They can speak confidently no matter what comes up, what questions they get asked. They come across clearly, persuasively, with impact, and I wish I could do that. This is what they say to me. And they often see these people as very extrovert. They see them as people who have strong opinions, are always there with their views, and that they really have a large share of voice as a result in the meetings and presentations that they're in. So I really want to talk about this topic because I think it's important to address some myths around this, and also to really talk about some ideas to help you to become a much more confident presenter, especially when you're working in English as your second language. So let's talk about the myth of the confident presenter. Well, we have this idea that we all have to be sort of high-level presenters every single time. And I think, we see a lot of TED speakers and feel like we always have to be presenting to this level, to this standard. And people look up and see this as an aspiration because these people appear to be very calm and in control and very persuasive with their presentation style. And this extrovert idea is a little bit of a challenge for me because I see this as a label that people often give themselves. They either say, I'm extrovert or I'm introvert, and that's how they believe they operate 100% of the time. The reality is that actually it's not really a label, it's not who we are, it's actually our characteristics. So we display introvert or extrovert characteristics, and that's not constant. In fact, there is a new word that I came across a couple of years ago, which I feel is much more helpful, and that word is ambivert. Somebody who shows ambivert characteristics is somebody who has that ability to be flexible to the situation and to the group of people. So sometimes they're showing them up as extrovert and sometimes they're showing up as introvert. And I think this is a much more realistic reflection of how most of us are. In fact, myself, even though I do have quite strong extrovert characteristics, have realized over time that I also have quite strong introvert characteristics and needs as well. So I think it's more helpful to move away from the very binary labels where you're either one thing or another, and think of yourself as an ambivert with the ability to dial up and dial down your characteristics depending on what's required of you in the moment. So now we've thought about that idea, I now want to talk about how can we therefore be more confident? How can we dial up our confidence and our extrovert characteristics, particularly when presenting, when we want to come across impactfully? This is a huge topic, and I'm going to just touch on a few areas today, and we'll talk more about presentation communication in the future in some future episodes. So to start off with, let's think about the planning. Clearly, presentations come down to what is it we plan to say and then how we execute it. Now, planning for most people tends to involve opening up a PowerPoint or a slide deck, and getting going with writing some slides. But in reality, that isn't the most effective way of doing it. And in fact, I would encourage people to ask themselves some questions as part of the planning. So, who is it you're talking to? Who are the audience, and what's motivating for them? What is the purpose of the presentation? What is it you're trying to achieve?
these kinds of questions will help you identify what your key messages are. And I'd focus that down to like three key things that you really, really want to say and land that people will remember. And that kind of planning is helpful for you because then you can also be clear about what the next step is after the presentation. So now once we've talked about planning, let's talk about your energy and body language. Now, most people would agree that the kind of energy you have, the kind of body language that you're showing can be really important to how you're coming across in a presentation. So whether that's how you are using your hand gestures, how you smile, how you place your body, you probably agree that if you stand up straight, then you feel like you're giving a stronger impression to others. But what's really, really interesting, and the research shows, is that our body language and energy can impact how we feel inside. It can impact our own confidence. There's an absolutely fantastic TED Talk, which I'll put a link to in the show notes, from Amy Cuddy, which talks about this idea, and her research shows that if we get our body language right before the presentation and as we go into the presentation, it can heighten our energy. And that's not just about how we're coming across to others, it's about how we feel in ourselves. How do we feel confident as we go into a presentation? So that can be a really interesting idea about preparing our body and energy to be confident, to come across well in the presentation. Now, the other parts which are important to think about and plan in advance include how you're going to open and how you're going to close. I think it's really difficult to script or to prepare and practice over and over again a full presentation. But I would say the particular parts to pay attention to and think about are what are the ways you're going to open your presentation and how you're going to close. These are two areas where the audience are going to be paying most attention. And this is where you can have the greatest impact through your words and how you're using them. So really do think carefully, and if you're going to practice any part of your presentation, focus here on the opening and the closing. And then finally, handling questions. I know for my clients, this is the area that most people feel quite nervous about, that they will have a question that comes up during the presentation or in the Q&A session at the end, where they just won't really know what to say. They won't know how to react, and they won't be able to handle it professionally. So what I want to say as my final tip here for feeling confident in presenting impactfully, is that you don't have to answer questions in the presentation if you don't want to. I think there are a couple of techniques that work really well here. We can delay our response and say to somebody that we'll get back to them after the meeting or the presentation. We can pick up with somebody individually to have an individual conversation rather than putting ourselves under pressure in the presentation itself. And of course, we can just give our first thoughts, our best guess, and then follow up afterwards with more detailed information. So those are the couple of ways that we can handle questions when we're not sure whether they will be confident in how we'll handle them. As we come to the end of this presentation, this episode even, I'm talking too much about presentations. As we come to the end of this episode, I suppose I'm really interested to know, and for you to reflect on, what have you noticed about your presentation confidence? What is it that you particularly find challenging? And thinking about the action tips that I shared today around how you can build up your confidence when it comes to presentation communication. Which of these are you going to take and try out in your next presentation? Which ones will work for you? We don't know until we try, so I would love to know. So please do feel free to feed back to me after you tried out these techniques to see which ones are working. The best way to do that is to connect with me or follow me, message me on LinkedIn. My personal profile is Victoria Reynoldson, and my surname is spelt Rennolson. And
Presentation communication is a core part of my individual coaching program, 9 Steps to Communication Confidence. So if this is a particular area which you are challenged in, and you know you need some dedicated, bespoke support to really help you build up this confidence for presentations in English, then please do get in touch. We still have applications open for this individual coaching program, and you can learn more about how this can help you. So again, just reach out to me via LinkedIn or via the links in the show notes. This brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. And if you've really enjoyed this episode, I really invite you to subscribe to the show so you know when the next episode comes out. If you are really enjoying these episodes so far, then please feel free to rate the show, review it, write a little comment about it. This means a lot to me, and also make sure that we can share the show more widely out there with a more global audience. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Cultural Communication Confidence podcast.